There are as many ways to run this detachment as there are ways to run Imperial Guard. Massive infantry horde, tank company, artillery support, a mechanized list, a cavalry list, all of these are ways to play the Brood Brothers Auxilia. But with a maximum of 50% of your army from the Astra Militarum range, you want to pick the best units available to fulfill their role. There is far less structural redundancy in this detachment compared to other detachments, and less so than in the Imperial Guard Codex. If you need a big tank to support you, you may only have one tank in your army that can do that, and losing it means you lose all of your tank support. This video will have a deep explanation of what the Brood Brothers Auxilia can do, a tier list of the best and worst Genestealer Cult units to include, and an analysis of the best Imperial Guard unit to include, that is in a tier list, and what tactics you can use to get the best from them. At the time of recording, the Imperial Guard Codex has only just come out with updated points, but an updated Legends document showing the wider range of units available to us has not come out. I am not excluding those units, I love Legends. You get to keep playing with your models even if Games Workshop doesn't sell them anymore. Hopefully the logic behind each unit I recommend or don't is clear enough for you to apply it to a Legend unit I don't mention. What I say about the Basilisk could apply to the Earthshaker Carriage Battery, assuming it has the same gun stats and abilities. I will bring up the Infantry Squad. We all love the Infantry Squad, which has been the human face of Imperial Guard since 2nd edition. The Brood Brothers Auxiliary Detachment is a good gateway detachment to get the Imperial Guard players into Genestealer Cult. If you play Astra Militarum, which I am just going to keep calling Imperial Guard, maybe you want to represent a sneaky regiment that deep strikes or uses human wave tactics. From a Genestealer Cult perspective, it's a bit harder to justify as you are buying units from another range. Even though the Imperial Guard units have been in the Genestealer Cult Codex since 7th edition when they returned after their hiatus since 2nd edition, and they were available in the 10th edition index, the Genestealer Cult Codex for 10th edition cut out the 25% allies, making it into a maximum of 50% allies, but only within this one detachment. And as with the Final Day detachment needing the Tyranids Codex, you have to buy the Astra Militarum Codex. There is no way around it. You have to buy it to get access to the unit rules, and the things I'm saying will sound really weird if you're not looking at the screen right now. So today we are playing the Genestealer Cult themed around the Hive Cult. They infiltrate the Astra Militarum, the PDF, Planetary Defense Force, militia groups, and private armies of planetary governors, so they have access to the big guns that other cults can only dream of. They specialize in disciplined military tactics and performing lots of false flag incidents and friendly fire, heavy quotation marks. They use the military of a planet or country or region to overthrow it, while other cults have to fight against or sabotage the army. The Hive Cult is the army. This is one of the detachment rules, the one that applies when you're playing the game. Integrated tactics. Each time an Astra Militarum unit from your army is selected to shoot, you can select an enemy unit within 18 inches and visible to that unit. Until the end of the phase, models in that Astra Militarum unit can only target that enemy unit, and the enemy unit is caught in overlapping fire. Each time a Genestealer Cult model from your army targets the enemy unit with a ranged attack, you add 1 to the hit roll. That's okay, there are limits, of course. As it requires line of sight, it's not so great for indirect fire weapons. And because you have to put all of your shots against the one enemy unit, that's not good for tanks that may want to split fire with guns good at shooting monsters and guns better at shooting infantry. All of them have to go for the same enemy. And this is your detachment rule. You don't also get an Imperial Guard detachment rule, so you can combine this with the combined regiment. Genestealer Cults is your army, Brood Brothers Auxilia is your detachment. And the detachment rule boosts the shooting of the Genestealer Cult, which is not the best, but at least it can be made better. Boosting the Imperial Guard shooting would be ideally the one boosted to make the big tanks better, but we have to keep the Genestealer Cult as the stars of the show. This is the Genestealer Cult featuring Imperial Guard. With some limits on the units we can take, up to half of your army can be from the Imperial Guard range of units. I want you to think of 2 main ways to build army lists with the Brood Brothers Auxilia. Either go hard for the detachment rule, that's one way. Pair up the units. So Rough Riders support Jackal Bikers, infantry squads like the Kriegers support Neophytes, Scout Sentinels are great for supporting Genestealer Cult and Imperial Guard units. You have a lot of small units, and they will be supporting one another to give those Genestealer Cult units the better shots. Ridge Runners, Cult Trucks, Neophytes can all shoot better. Or the other way of doing it is you use the Guard units to cover what we are lacking as a Genestealer Cult player. It gives us great support from vehicles and relatively elite infantry with good guns. This way we care less about the detachment rule and more about having an enhanced roster. Is there a cheaper Imperial Guard unit that does the same job as a Genestealer Cult unit? So forget Jackal Bikers with Rough Riders, just have Rough Riders. They can fulfill a similar role for 20-ish points fewer. I think this is the better way. Play the best units. Genestealer Cult can then be the combat side. If the detachment rule was giving Genestealer Cult +1 to hit for the rest of the turn and worked in melee or shooting, we would have a much better detachment rule. Genestealer Cult shooting isn't great compared to their combat ability, and I prefer Final Day for the bonuses to both sides, but Brood Brothers Auxilia is the only way to have real armoured support. We get big guns. I like big guns. As a way to learn how to play the Genestealer Cult and 40k, this is a useful detachment. There are fewer Genestealer Cult units to use Cult Ambush on, they are the only ones that can use Cult Ambush with one exception, so you're not really paralysed for choice on where you spend your Cult Ambush points. You learn the rules on the datasheets, you don't need to worry about the stratagems or the detachment rule so much, you just learn to play the game. The stratagems of the Brood Brothers Auxilia are amazing. They're amazing because they make you really appreciate the core stratagems. The other way to sum them up is memes.
This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
The first stratagem we're going to look at is Regimental Reinforcements. This is the exception to only Genestealer Cult units using the Cult Ambush markers. One of your Astra Militarum Infantry Regiment keyword units that was destroyed, but not artillery or characters, another copy of that unit can return by Cult Ambush on a 3+. You place a Cult Ambush marker anywhere on the battlefield, and get a copy of the dead unit in a special kind of reserves called Cult Ambush, but back at starting strength, with all their weapons reloaded because it is a totally new unit. I used it. I rolled a 2. So I lost the unit, lost a command point, and I can never use the stratagem ever again. Ever. It is once per game as a result of a balance patch, but I don't want to try it in another game. I felt too hurt by the dice betrayal. It shouldn't be conditional on a roll. It has a lot of limits already, and even if you compare it to the 2 command point Astra Militarum reinforcement stratagem, we are limited to infantry and regiment and are restricted by Cult Ambush where the enemy can remove the marker and the unit is still lost. It can only be used in your opponent's shooting phase or either player's fight phase, so if the unit died from an ability in the enemy charge phase, like Tank Shock, it can't be used. If the unit died while battle shocked, it can't be used on them because you can't use stratagems on battle shocked units. But if you were able to use it, the best units to use it on are Kazakin, Krieg Engineers, and a large squad of 20 Imperial Guard Death Corps of Krieg Infantry. In the Shadow of Iron is a stratagem that protects a Cult Ambush marker. If the enemy moves within 9 inches of one of your Cult Ambush markers, the Cult Ambush marker is removed. In the Shadow of Iron lets you put the ambush marker back on the board near to one of your vehicles. This is almost a legacy stratagem at this point. Unless the stratagem gets updated in a balance patch, it is almost useless. The way Cult Ambush works right now, a Genestealer Cult unit in Cult Ambush can arrive through Cult Ambush markers, which is like rapid ingress to 1 point, or we can arrive through Deep Strike. Because of that second part, the loss of the ambush marker is not a big deal. It may be more of a deal if the only ambush marker on the board was for your returning Kazakin or 20 Krieg cultists, but they can arrive from any Cult Ambush marker, and even if a Genestealer Cult unit arrives through Deep Strike, you don't take off the Cult Ambush marker placed when that unit went into Cult Ambush. So there should be spare Cult Ambush markers around the board. The only specific case where you would want to use this is if you wanted a returning unit near one of your tanks and wanted it there like right now in the enemy movement phase. Because you should be taking some vehicles, even if they are sentinels in a small game. Symbiotic Destruction is the most useful stratagem. Symbiotic Destruction is in your shooting phase, you have one Astra Militarum unit and one Genestealer Cult unit that haven't been selected to shoot yet. They both target the same enemy unit that is visible to both of them and in range of both of them, and then models that make shooting attacks can reroll wound rolls of 1. 1 command point and 2 of your units, if you set it up correctly, get to reroll wound rolls of 1. You shoot with the guard unit first, and then the Genestealer Cult unit will also get +1 to hit from the detachment rule. We use this stratagem for the guard tanks. Now a Rogal Dawn rerolls all wound rolls of 1. Now a Shadow Sword avoids any accidental ones to wound with its big goodbye forever cannon. And then the paired Genestealer Cult unit can get +1 to hit that target, if there's anything left of Angron. If the target is gone, you don't get to fire the other unit, because you can only make attacks against the target enemy unit. Make sure you fire the best guns first to avoid shenanigans like the Imperialist Fleet Displacer Field, where after being shot, the enemy could move their unit out of line of sight of your other unit. So this is a good stratagem for the big Imperial Guard tanks when paired with a small Genestealer Cult unit like 5 Acolytes, or a shot from a Sanctus Sniper or Jackal Alphas. Dark Network is the only stratagem that doesn't require Astra Militarum units, so you know Games Workshop wants you to take lots of Astra Militarum units in this detachment. In the enemy movement phase, just after they set up a unit on the battlefield from reserves, one of your units, but not vehicles or monsters, within 12 inches can make a normal move of 6 inches. So you can move away from enemies that are going to try and charge you, good, or with Metamorphs you could move closer and say, go on. I dare you to shoot me. I will be in combat with you before you can say surge move. You can surge move once in each phase, so once in the enemy movement phase with this stratagem, and once in the enemy shooting phase with the Brood Surge ability on the Metamorphs datasheet. I like that this stratagem has a 12-inch range, I like that it is a fixed 6-inch move, but it is one specific kind of enemy move that we get to react to. If Deep Strike became more prevalent and you could Deep Strike much closer than before and Deep Strike was better, as, you know, something that might happen with the rules, then this stratagem would become more useful. Otherwise, it's like the second best stratagem, and even then, you might not get to use it in the game. Acceptable Losses is such a bad and expensive stratagem. It is 2 command points. One Astra Militarum unit from your army can shoot at an enemy unit within engagement range of 1 or more of your Genestealer Cult units. So if there's an Astra Militarum unit in combat, you can't shoot. And after you've resolved the attacks, you roll a d6 for each Genestealer Cult unit that was in engagement range of the enemy, and on a 5+, the unit takes d3 + 1 mortal wounds. There are not a lot of times you'll want to use this. If it's attacking a tank, like a Goliath truck or Rock Grinder, you have big guns never tire. You can still shoot even while in combat. It may be useful if the enemy has a Blood Surge move and you shot them with one unit and then they moved into combat with one of your units in your shooting phase. Then you could spend this to still be able to shoot at them with one of your Astra Militarum units. Or the only other specific case I can think of is you being on an objective with neophytes in combat and falling back would mean you move off the objective marker, and also you have a single perfect guard unit nearby to kill the enemy, and you have 2 command points. When those stars align, let me know. In fact, if you have used this stratagem, and not just because you thought it would be funny, let me know the circumstances in which you used it. Suppress and Overwhelm is the 6th stratagem. It's the Stop Overwatch stratagem, but not really. In your shooting phase, after you've fired one of your Astra Militarum units, you select one enemy unit that was hit by one of those attacks. Until the end of the turn, that enemy unit cannot be targeted by Fire Overwatch, and each time a Genestealer Cult unit from your army selects that enemy unit as the target of the charge, you can re-roll the charge roll. The problem with stopping Overwatch is it's too late to stop Overwatch because you can Fire Overwatch in the movement phase. So if you move a Genestealer Cult unit closer to an enemy, ready to charge them, they could Fire Overwatch at that point, before you've had your shooting phase when you could use Suppress and Overwhelm. You may also use this stratagem and then not need to reroll the charge roll. You have to use this stratagem in the shooting phase before the charge phase where you roll those charge rolls. It's usually better to wait and see if you need the 1 command point reroll for the charge. the best thing to use the reroll stratagem on. If you had 2 command points and 2 units with risky charges coming up, you might do it for one of them and then stratagem reroll the other one. But this is a shooting detachment. You want Genestealer Cult units with guns to get the best of the detachment bonus. Otherwise, this is the only stratagem that's really helping your charging units, your combat specialist, your aberrants. One good thing is this stratagem doesn't need line of sight, unlike the detachment rule. And there is a really specific use case if you want to shoot at a unit with a guard unit and then charge it with multiple Genestealer Cult units. All of the Genestealer Cult units that select the enemy as the target of their charge can reroll the charge. That may be useful on a turn where combat units come from deep strike, or where there's one enemy you want to gaggle gank. This is a technical term for having a bunch of people run in and stab it. The real stratagems of this detachment are the following. The grenade stratagem. Almost all of your units have grenades. You get to cause some mortal wounds to any enemy unit. There is tank shock. We have tanks. They have decent toughness, especially the Lehman Russ, and of course the super heavies like the Baneblade. They can cause mortal wounds. Smokescreen will give your tanks cover and stealth, so they are -1 to be hit. The New Order stratagem will let you swap out a secondary you don't like for a better secondary. In the Leviathan mission deck, you could use this once per game. In the Pariah Nexus mission deck, you can use this once per turn. If you have a better secondary to score, you get more victory points. This is a worthwhile use of a command point. You have Go to Ground for a 6+ invulnerable save and the benefit of cover, so your infantry units hiding on an objective can stay alive better. And there is Overwatch, which gets better with an enhancement. So let's talk about those enhancements. While the stratagems need Astra Militarum units, the enhancements are for Genestealer Cult models only. Nothing for the Astra Militarum. Firepoint Commander is a cheap and fun enhancement that lets your Overwatch hit on a 5+. This is an okay enhancement to have on a unit joining a squad of neophytes. Remember that Overwatch is one of our main stratagems. It is worth it as an enhancement. Adaptive Reprisal for 15 points means that once per turn, you can target a friendly Genestealer Cult unit within 9 inches. They get to heroically intervene for free. So it can be used on units other than the bearer. You could pull in another Genestealer Cult unit to support you, one that doesn't have any characters. Though remember that even though this has a 9-inch range, Heroic Intervention is a 6-inch range. You still need to be eligible to use the stratagem correctly. It doesn't change the range of the stratagem. Although when you are heroically intervening, you still roll 2d6 and move that distance as your charge roll. You're not capped at 6 inches. The best thing to do is put this on a locus. They are within 9 inches of themselves, so they can use it on their own unit. Heroic Intervention works best on a unit with fights first. Because with Heroic Intervention, you don't get the charge bonus which lets you fight first. We want the locus to do that, and oh, we're in the enemy's turn. Our fight first happens first. If you have a locus, it's a good enhancement. Martial Espionage, I think we locked to Sean Connery. Martial Espionage is 25 points. Once per turn, when a friendly Astra Militarum infantry or Astra Militarum mounted unit within 9 inches is selected to shoot, this enhancement can be used, and until the end of the phase, you improve the armor penetration of their ranged weapons by 1. You can make a big block of Kriegers much better as an option, but I prefer to make Kazakin hit even harder. Then their hotshot lasguns will be AP -2, and all the special weapons they have will get an extra point of armor penetration. You could have the Kazakin come from Strategic Reserve, and then you deep strike the character that has this enhancement near to them, or also arrive from Strategic Reserves. So you could have a Sanctus Sniper. They're a lone operative and happy to go alone. You could have a Reductus. They're a lone operative, so they can't be shot easily, and enemies moving close to the Kazakin will meet her bombs first. And you are pairing an Imperial Guard unit and a Genestealer Cult unit. You have the Kazakin fire first, then you have the Reductus fire. Then her demo charges can hit on a 2+. Even her remote explosives can get +1 to hit and can be used out of line of sight. Integrated Tactics only requires the Imperial Guard unit to be within 18 inches and have line of sight. You could use a Speedy Jackal Alphas to get to the unit they want to improve, fire and move a bit further to get even closer, or hide behind cover after shooting. This enhancement also works on the heavy weapon squad, the artillery team, and the field ordnance battery. They are all infantry. An extra point of armor penetration there can offset the benefit of cover that the enemy would get because you are firing indirectly. This is a nice point of armor penetration to stack with the Leman Russ Exterminator for another point of armor penetration on the Imperial Guard unit, or with a Hellhound which removes cover from the enemy, so you'll always be getting at least 1 point of armor penetration. 25 points is expensive for an enhancement, so get the most out of it. A Hero Returned improves the leadership and objective control of models in the Bearers unit by 1. This could be on anything. It could be a character with 20 Neophytes to have an absurd 60 objective control. The Neophytes can do some damage in this attachment, but their main skill remains as a tar pit to hold objectives. You could put this enhancement on the Patriarch to give Genestealers the objective control to take objectives, but I don't recommend the Patriarch in this detachment. Regardless, this enhancement is a better version of the Biosancti Brood Surge Alien Majesty, and it is an enhancement for spare points. If we are spending points, which units are we spending points on? Now we enter the army list advice stage, the tier list stage, but rather than doing it visually and having things put onto a screen, I think you know the names of the things and can look up the images of the things, and the ones you have made may be different to the ones Games Workshop sells because I do encourage kit bashing. So we start with the best Genestealer Cult units going through to the worst Genestealer Cult units. And it seems that every Genestealer Cult tier list should start with the Ridge Runner in A tier. You can have the Ridge Runners come on from reserve so they're safe at the start of the game, and then with their Ballistic Skill 3+ spotter and a +1 to hit from Integrated Tactics, their heavy mining lasers hit on a 2+. This does work because the spotter doesn't add 1 to your roll, it changes what your ballistic skill is. Then Integrated Tactics adds 1 to the roll. You should shoot with an Imperial Guard unit, or all the Imperial Guard units, then shoot with the Ridge Runner. The Ridge Runner should be the first Genestealer Cult unit you fire in the shooting phase. This means that lots of Genestealer Cult units can get the bonuses from the Guard, and a unit can get the bonus from the Ridge Runner. Instead of the mining laser, you could have a mortar and a survey auger. The +1 to hit from the Integrated Tactics counters the indirect fire penalty, and then other Genestealer Cult units shooting at the target unit will have +1 to hit from the Guard, ignore cover from the survey auger, and an extra point of armor penetration from the crossfire rule. The survey auger is useful because this isn't Host of Ascension, which gives you ignore cover when you come from reserves. So ignore cover is a useful bonus, and we are mainly shooting. This is the detachment that has big guns, but also does death by 1,000 buffs. Metamorphs are very good. With auto pistols, it's great if enemies deep strike nearby, we move closer with a dark network. If they shoot us, we guarantee getting into combat, unlike with the hand flamers on the Metamorphs. If they don't shoot us, that is also a win. I like not getting shot. I do that on a daily basis. It is a very situational case. The enemy has to come from reserves and also come near the Metamorphs while we have a command point available. So hand flamers are usually the best way to go. But this is the unit that provides good close combat in an otherwise shooting detachment. With hand flamers, they can do both, and they make use of symbiotic destruction for reroll wound rolls of 1, which is something that the acolytes with hand flamers already get. In a truck traveling alongside a Taurox or Chimera of Imperial Guard units, they have a cool pairing. The Guard unit gets out, the Metamorphs get out, they both shoot the same target if they want to, and the Metamorphs get to charge something, while the Imperial Guard unit controls objectives. To support the Metamorphs, I suggest a Locus, an A-tier character, though not one that many other people agree with me on. If they have Adaptive Reprisal, they get to heroically intervene for free. I put them with Metamorphs. They can attack the enemy, or they can hang near an objective. The objective could be held with Neophytes or an Imperial Guard unit, it could be a heavy weapon team, or the Metamorphs could tow onto the objective themselves. If the enemy wants to attack, they risk the Metamorphs surging into engagement range and fighting with their unit surge move. If the enemy charges, we fight first. If the enemy charges the Neophytes or heavy weapon team that's on the objective, we can heroically intervene for free and fight first. The enemy will see that objective and go, yeah, no, I'm gonna go somewhere else. The Primus is always a very good character. They're a very expensive character, but good. They provide full rerolls to hit, so usually a neophyte unit can have much better shooting. And with Firepoint Commander, you overwatch on a 5+, with full rerolls. That is almost as good as a regular round of shooting from a neophyte unit. The Primus can redeploy up to 3 units that can move them around the board or put them into reserve. He can't redeploy Imperial Guard units, it is Genestealer Cults keyword units only. But you could use your strategic reserves quota on Imperial Guard units that you want to keep safe, like the Kazakin, and then move additional Genestealer Cult units off the board into reserves before the game starts. Neophytes are an A-tier unit in this detachment. They are an okay shooting unit generally. They have a lot of different shots from a lot of different weapons. Put a Primus in there, and you hit on a 3+ with integrated tactics with full rerolls to hit, or a 4+ for the seismic cannon and the mining laser, because even if you remain stationary, you can't stack heavy with +1 to hit because they are both +1 to hit. You max out at +1 to hit, not including changes to your ballistic skill. I would have in a unit of 20, 2 mining lasers, 2 seismic cannons, 2 webbers rather than the flamers because you might get to reroll wound rolls of 1 and they have devastating wounds as a possibility. And 2 grenade launchers. You could have 2 flamers instead of the grenade launchers if you wanted to really rely on that overwatch. 2 flamers and 2 webbers can upset toughness 3 infantry like Dark Eldar. Add a Ridge Runner with an auger for ignore cover and an extra armor penetration, symbiotic destruction to reroll wound rolls of 1. It's a nasty bunch of combos, but it takes a lot of units to set up, and it just isn't as strong as a Host of Ascension, and it's harder to organize. It's less organizing a drinking party in a brewery, and more organizing a drinking party in the middle of a temperance meeting. If your country didn't have a temperance movement, it was just a group of people being like, stop drinking so much. But you can still drink a bit. This isn't abstinence, we don't do that. The neophytes have sticky objectives, so that's good, and that lets you hold objectives while also moving up with tanks. Smaller units of neophytes will get little benefit from the detachment rule, if applicable, but they are good cheap units for secondary missions and having bodies on objectives, before you then move off and go to the next objective to make it sticky. Now we move on to the B tier units. You will probably still want some of these if your army isn't entirely made up of A tier units and Brood Brothers Auxilia. You know, Imperial Guard units. You may want some of these units, you may want none of these units. But if you're seeing that you don't have any units in the A tier or the B tier, this is probably not the detachment for you. The Goliath truck is B tier. It keeps a small unit protected. If they're transporting neophytes, then those neophytes could have +1 to hit from the detachment rule and full rerolls to wound when disembarking. It requires the truck and the disembarking unit and a Brood Brothers unit to shoot the same enemy, but with multiple small units, it could happen. Death from 1,000 buffs. I think it's better to transport metamorphs into battle, then their auto-hitting hand flamers get full rerolls to wound, which the acolytes with hand flamers already get when targeting enemies on objectives. So the acolytes with hand flamers are a B tier, compared to the metamorphs. If paired with guard, then you won't get any benefit from the detachment rule or symbiotic destruction. The one good stratagem that gives them nothing as they already have reroll wound rolls of 1. Their demo charges could hit on a 4+, but that requires getting close and having a guard unit to shoot the same target. If you're thinking, hang on, doesn't this mean that the acolytes with hand flamers have all the bonuses that metamorphs need to have command points and detachment rules spent on to get them to work at their same level as the acolytes with hand flamers? Well, it means that in this detachment, the metamorphs can have the same abilities as the acolytes with hand flamers, plus the metamorphs have their own special rule, plus the metamorphs' attacks are way better in close combat than the acolytes with hand flamers, and there's very few points between them. The better combat profile, plus scout, plus feel no pain, is why I prefer the metamorphs. They are instead a useful small unit to complete secondary missions and return with resurgence points as the cheapest unit. 2 resurgence points for a squad of 5. They can keep coming back and harassing the enemy. Acolytes with mining tools, again I would stick with a small unit of 5 on the home objective to start with to mine for command points. You could have a unit of 10 as a combat unit with anti-vehicle mining tools, but metamorphs are more general purpose and they can have hand flamers. In this detachment with more big guns available, I hope we don't have to resort to cutting the vehicles with rock saws. The Jackal Alphas is an okay unit to support the guard for the 25 points +1 armor penetration enhancement. They also give Genestealer Cult units reroll hit rolls of 1. Very useful for all of our actually shooting units that we're going to try and make good in this detachment. So you could make a Ridge Runner hit on a 2+, re-rolling hit rolls of 1. That's pretty good. The Jackal Alphas can operate alone, they don't need the Jackal Bikers. But they're no lone operative. The Sanctus is the sniper that's a lone operative. You could have a knife and then the enemy can't overwatch you without having to faff on with the no overwatch allowed stratagem. Actually, this is better because it stops overwatch in the movement phase as well. I prefer the sniper version in this detachment because hitting on a 2+ from that integrated tactics bonus is halving the number of misses. With a flat damage 3, there are many characters that can be taken out in one shot. Or if you take out a Terminator, you have almost paid for yourself. A unit like that, with 3 wounds, is the kind of unit I would pick as the target for Psychic Spoor. They often have high toughness, and being able to reroll all hit rolls and all wound rolls is great. It's a shame it's one shot, but you're getting a lot more because this is a lone operative character. As a lone operative, the Sanctus can do the same things as other lone operatives, stand on objectives without getting shot, complete secondary missions, and they can support a lot of Krieg-style cultist and Kazakin with martial espionage. The Reductus Saboteur can infiltrate. If your indirect fire guard weapons can kill the enemy screens, that's the weak, very disposable units they tend to put at the front of their army, then their elite units will have to come closer to her objective and take the mortal wounds from her planted explosives. Probably. It's a 9-inch range ability only. The Reductus Saboteur could ride in a truck with other Genestealer Cult units. With the detachment ability, her demo charges hit on a 2+, and the truck would give her full rerolls to wound. She could also support the guard with the enhancement that does the thing where she points at the men and suddenly their guns can penetrate deeper. For additional infiltration, have some pure strains. It is always good to control the mid-board with infiltrating units at the start of the game, if only to stop enemy infiltrating units from controlling the mid-board at the start of the game. But this is a shooting detachment. Small numbers of pure strains can be useful, and they are good at getting rid of enemy scouts and infiltrators like Kroot, Space Marine Scouts, and Tau stealth suits. The Icon Ward is a B tier character, but only if you're doing one tactic, otherwise they go down to D tier. With 20 neophytes, and the Hero Returned enhancement, that is a unit of neophytes that are +1 OC, +1 leadership, and now have a 5+ feel no pain. That is hard to shift, and even if the unit is nearly all destroyed, they will continue to hold the objective with their high objective control, unlikely to fail battle shock because they're now leadership 5+, and then their cult icon will regenerate D3+3 models. And if you needed more reinforcements in the area, if a cult ambush marker is removed, the Icon Ward can put it near themselves and then a unit can pop out nearby. Speaking of just popping out, an Abominant. They can pop up and hit enemy tanks all by themselves. Strength 12 Hammer. Complements other las cannons we may have, and she hits with the power of 4 las cannons. If we're thinking of data sheets only, not any of the bonuses, Big Hammer Lady still punches hard and is a pain for the enemy to take down, because you often have to take her down twice. We like Big Hammer Lady on this channel. Comments about Big Hammer Lady are always appreciated. C tier are okay choices, but they're probably going to perform suboptimally. So there's Aberrants. If we're playing just off the power of data sheets, they are okay, bit expensive, and don't often see play except if there's synergy, especially in the Biosanctic Brood Surge. They could be transported by a truck or arrive through rapid ingress, but they're a combat unit that gets nothing, almost completely nothing, from the detachment. If there is something they can use, the Metamorphs can do it better, like Adaptive Reprisal, best on a character with a unit that has fight first. A Locus can't join Aberrants. Aberrants still hammer pretty well, and they are hard to get rid of, but there are many better options. The Benefactus is a shooting fellow. I find them too expensive at 70 points. Lethal hits in shooting in a shooting focused detachment is okay. They would enjoy +1 to hit from the detachment rule, but if you're taking a Benefactus for the las cannon brain, could I introduce you to the Imperial Guard who have actual las cannons? 3 Kachan weapon teams with las cannons is more shots with las cannons and is 20 points cheaper. Better get the las cannons that we're going out for rather than the las cannon we have at home. The Biophagus gives lethal hits in combat. That may lead them to be a good choice in your opinion regardless of detachment, But as we have about half a Genestealer Cult army to go with half a Guard army, and shooting is the focus, I will stick with that theme and try not to boost the combat element up. And when I do, it's with the Locust. The Atalan Jackals have some shooting that would like a boost from the detachment rule, a mining laser, a grenade launcher. They are useful at rushing to an objective as they can scout, or they can harass the enemy as long as they have support. In this detachment, we can get support from Rough Riders, but with Rough Riders being cheaper and having melter-tip lancers, the Jackal Bikers may find themselves completely replaced by superior horse technology. The Goliath Rock Grinder is useful as a transport for a very small unit like Metamorphs or Aberrants, but it has a surprising number of guns. A heavy mining laser is the best for this detachment, or the massive seismic cannon. It also has a heavy stubber and an inexhaustible demolition charge cache. Bonuses to hit are good for it. The profile is pretty tough, but I have two problems with it. The truck transports more models and supports their shooting in a shooting detachment, which the Rock Grinder does not. I like the rerolls to wound, it's very valuable. The Ridge Runner may fall apart easier, but the Ridge Runner is cheaper, has the same big laser, they can have a spotter to hit on a 3+ going to 2+, and the Ridge Runner supports our Genestealer Cult units with extra armor penetration. Finally, the D tier. The outright bad choices in this detachment. I am not saying never, not allowed, but I don't believe you get much return for your points. With the Patriarch, well, you can take pure strains and they are good, but the Patriarch gets no bonuses or great combos unlike in the Biosanctuary Brute Surge or Final Day. 5 more pure strains for the same points will go down better. The Magos is here. They make enemy shooting worse, well, one enemy shooting unit, and only if you don't roll a 1. But if we want to resist enemy shooting, we have a Guard Primaris Psyker instead. Or for the Genestealer Cult side, you could have an Icon Ward for the same points. Oh look, a Clamorous. I do dislike the Clamorous on principle. In this detachment, they're only useful if the enemy has lots of deep striking and reserves, but because we have a stratagem to move away or towards one enemy unit that arrives from reserves, a small number of reserves is counted. And I think we should have the command points available because we ain't spending them on much else. The Nexus makes stratagems cheaper and cost 60 points. At this point, I hope I have established that you are not spending many command points on the detachment stratagems. Unless your collection can't let you go for any other character. Then you would put the Nexus in Neophytes with 5-point commander, and then your 20 Neophytes can shoot Overwatch better and for free. Free in command points. This costs you 70 points including the enhancement, so I don't recommend it. The Kellamorph already hits on a 2+, so isn't really getting a benefit from this detachment despite shooting and rooting and tooting being his thing. Other lone operatives like the Sanctus and the Reductus Saboteur are about the same cost and can do similar things. Arrive from deep strike and complete secondary missions, stay on objectives and not be shot as a lone operative. And a last mention of the Tectonic Frag Drill. Is that sufficient mention? Yeah. We have to acknowledge our Legends units, otherwise Games Workshop might forget that they even exist. When you are playing the Brood Brothers Auxilia, we want to choose some good Astra Militarum units. What is best for the Imperial Guard players when they're playing Imperial Guard with the Imperial Guard book is not the same as when you're a Genestealer Cult player borrowing some Imperial Guard units. Which ones are the best ones to include in the Brood Brothers Auxilia Genestealer Cult detachment? We are looking for a few traits. We want units that can act alone and don't need orders, because we don't have them to give. They should have their own independent ability or are giving us something we lack, like heavy tanks. We can exploit points drops that the Astra Militarum have. Hypothetically, if a unit like the Baneblade had a points drop, because Lord Solar Leontus can't order them anymore, which happened in the balanced data slate and appears to still be there, we could get a cheaper Baneblade and are no worse off in terms of rules. The detachment rule does limit the kind of units we can take. We have our own mutants, so no Auxilia, like the big mutants and the really small mutants. No characters from another religious sect, so that's the Ministorum Priest and the Tech Priest. We have our own religion we need to follow. It worships an emperor, of sorts. No epic heroes who are canonically not corrupted by the Genestealer Cult, and none of the posh boys from the Ordo Perfectus like Commissars and Tempestus Scions. though I will show off one exception. The Genestealer Cult have to be the warlord in this detachment, so we can't do silly Titan and Knight and Imperial Agent shenanigans anymore, which is sad. Made a very funny tournament list. This is the only detachment where you can include Imperial Guard allies, unlike the 25% of the index, which is what I preferred. If you take any officers from the Imperial Guard, they lose the voice of command ability, but there is one exception to the loss of the voice of command, and we still can access the voice of command rule if applicable. You will see it on the Games Workshop app below the cult ambush ability. I will start with the best units for this detachment, the A tier, and because you are only able to take half your army from the Astra Militarum pool of units, you may never look beyond this top tier. But for all the units, I want to explain why I believe they are not as good, or importantly, if you have a non-A tier unit, what you can do with it, but who does it better. In A tier are the Death Corps of Krieg. Have a big blob of 20 guys. They can be made from the Brood Brothers kill team. The unit gets +1 to hit as soon as they take a single casualty, and they get +1 to wound as well when they're below half strength, so when there's 9 or fewer of them left. Using a Death Corps of Krieg Marshal was a good tactic from the index for the Imperial Guard. That would give the unit a 5+ Fear No Pain. Not bad for 60 points, it's very similar to the Icon Ward with 20 Neophytes giving them a 5+ Fear No Pain. But I can't seem to find their rules. The Legends counts as still suggests using no longer sold models as a Death Corps of Krieg Marshal, but the Death Corps of Krieg Marshal doesn't seem to be in Legends or Imperial Armor. So if you still use those rules from earlier in 10th edition, they're good, but they won't get the orders. Alternatively, you can use a Primaris Psyker as the leader to join the Krieg. If you have too many packs in the unit, you can heal D3+1 models at the start of your command phase. This sounds very similar to Neophytes, but potentially with a bit more punch. Neophytes are the same cost, and probably do better, so we do need something else to boost the Krieg to make them better than the Neophytes. With all of their lasgun shots and special weapons, they're a good unit to have the extra armor penetration enhancement on with a Wandering Sanctus, Kelamorph, Demo Lady, whichever one is the cheapest at the time you make your army list. But that extra point of armor penetration on lasguns can be easily swallowed up by the benefit of cover, so we need to get rid of that. The Hellhound's ability removes cover for the enemy unit. So all the units in your army, the Imperial Guard and the Genestealer Cult, they will get to ignore cover against the targeted enemy unit. That's good. Then we have a unit that supports both sides of our army. That's pretty rare. The Hellhound has very nice flamers for Overwatch and a pretty solid tank profile. I mean, Genestealer Cult and Battle Sisters will have to put some serious effort into killing it. That's what I mean by a good tank profile. Or you could have an actual big tank. The Leman Russ Battle Tank, the regular Russ. They can reroll hit rolls by themselves, and they don't need orders to do so. They reroll hit rolls of 1, and if you're attacking an enemy on an objective, you reroll all hit rolls. That's great for Overwatch when you have a big gun and reroll all hit rolls. And the unit rule doesn't just apply to the big cannon, it is all of the guns on the model. It also works in combat, it is all attacks. So without needing any support, it can reliably perform. The Demolisher Leman Russ is also a very powerful tank. You could charge it in, use Tank Shock, that is one of our key stratagems, get tied up in combat, but in your following turn, you can keep firing its Blast Demolisher Cannon, which is strength 14. It gives the real anti-tank punch that the Genestealer Cult need. Or we think bigger. Why get a small tank when even at 1,000 points you can have a Shadow Sword? Maybe don't at 1,000 points. That's too much of our points in just the big tank. But this has a big cannon to destroy things. The biggest cannon! And you deserve the biggest and best cannon. Strength 24, AP -5, damage 12, and you get D3+1 shots with Blast. I hate enemy tanks as a Genestealer Cult player. We don't have that much that can get rid of them. This cannon does. And as part of the package, you also get 4 las cannons and 5 twin heavy bolters. If you're not focusing on supporting the Genestealer Cult and using the detachment rule, you're making up for what we lack, and nothing says good shooting like a big cannon. Focus on an enemy and reroll wound rolls of 1 with symbiotic destruction. That works on the Shadow Sword. All you need is any Genestealer Cult unit. It could be a Sanctus Sniper. And that gets rid of the, oh, I rolled a 1 to wound, when you're wounding like everything on a 2+. Imperial Guard Codex armies can't usually do that. So the super heavies with the biggest guns go up in value for the Genestealer Cult. Deploying a Titanic vehicle counts as 2 deployments, a rule that's often forgotten, so you get to see more of what the enemy is putting down before you commit the rest of your army. And we're going to do some shenanigans with the Primus where we redeploy things. Not Imperial Guard units, but Genestealer Cult units. This is an Objective Control 8 tank, and unless playing with the core rules, objective marker rules, which very few people actually do, you can cover the marker almost entirely. If you are a tournament player on a very terrain-heavy board, then you may be saying, no, stop, it's too big, it won't fit. In which case, you may rank it B or C tier and prefer a Rogal Dawn. The Rogal Dawn has similar tactics to the Super Heavies and is tough. 18 wounds with a 2+ save and a once per game ignore an attack before finding out the damage of it. Although if you know it's flat damage 3, you know you can ignore a damage 3 attack. But if the attack was d6 damage, you would change it to 0 before finding out the dice roll. You don't get to see, oh, the first one was a 6, the second one was a 1, yeah, I'll ignore the 6. Doesn't work like that. That's still a very good ability. You can take the Oppressor Cannon with the Coaxial Autocannon and the Pulverizer Cannon for high strength, high damage. It's a good tank that can operate alone and put out a lot of firepower. And with its deck plate missing, it looks like the Genestealer Cult tunneled underneath and then cut their way inside and carried it off. The Doomhammer makes a good alternative to the Shadow Sword where it matters. Against monsters and vehicles, its massive magma cannon is always considered to be in half range to make use of the Melter 6 rule. The strength of its main gun is lower than the Shadow Sword and the damage is random. Despite more shots, it doesn't have the same one shot, one kill of the Shadow Sword. Interestingly, it has a transport capacity for a block of, say, 20 Kriegers or 2 squads of Kazakin. Firing deck 6 is worth using by at least 1 squad of Kazakin, though they won't be able to scout because it's not a dedicated transport. And it can't transport Genestealer Cult models, so no neophyte block inside this tank. The Kazakin are our elite infantry. They can be made from the Brood Brothers Kill Team unit if you so wished. At the moment, there are no rules for the Brood Brothers Kill Team in 40k. You just proxy them as one Imperial Guard unit of your choice. The set comes with a plasma gun, a grenade launcher, a sniper, a mine bomb thing, and a melter gun. All except the volley gun are represented. The Kazakin have a special ability to give themselves orders. We explicitly can still use the Kazakin's order even though we're not Imperial Guard. And this ability is now once per battle round at the start of any phase, not locked to the command phase. So you can go to ground when you need to, or take aim so you're hitting on a 2+. And more of those shots, especially melter gun shots, will go through the enemy when supported by a Genestealer Cult character with the extra armor penetration enhancement. This is one of the best Imperial Guard units, perhaps the only good choice for the Regimental Reinforcement Stratagem. Krieg Combat Engineers have popped up as the new kids on the block, with their own 4+ armor save and semi-elite infantry role. They give you a free grenade stratagem. Grenades is one of our core stratagems. They have a remote mine to hit a tank and do lots of mortal wounds, and they can scout, which is really valuable in crusade missions as you can score a lot of missions in the first battle round. Or in any game, complete secondary missions on objectives, which are usually 7 or 8 inches from your deployment zone in any of the game modes, so you'd usually have to advance and then you can't complete secondary missions that require actions. They're an interesting alternate choice to Kazakin, both as a unit of 5 and as a unit of 10 for a few points more. Another unit introduced with the Imperial Guard Codex are the Krieg Heavy Weapons teams. They can have las cannons, twin heavy stubbers, or damage 2 flamers. I'll have the damage 2 flamers, thank you. You could outflank with this unit by putting them into strategic reserves. That way they won't get shot. They move on where they need to and shoot the enemy. When the enemy moves closer, we overwatch. And when they're killed, they get to shoot on death on a 3+. Damage 2 flamers. And they're a great way to convey the detachment rule. Small Imperial Guard units that are cheap and able to do damage are pretty rare. And the more small guard units you have, the more Genestealer Cult units you can give the integrated tactics +1 to hit bonus to. The Katachan heavy weapons teams are also very nice. They have the anti-monster, anti-tank ability. You reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 against those enemies. Great. They can scout, so they can hide if you don't get the first turn, and they can be further enhanced with martial espionage. Oh, and they have lasguns as well, not small arms. So you get some more shots compared to like the Cadian heavy weapons teams. Doesn't matter about the base size. No one really cares about the base size. But these are meant to be on 60mm bases, whereas the Eucadian heavy weapons teams that are sold are on 50mm bases. The Scout Sentinel is a wonderful choice for supporting both sides of our army, the Imperial Guard side and the Genestealer Cult side. They spot for valuable guard units that want to reroll hit rolls of 1. The Scout Sentinels are cheap and surprisingly tough. And of course they're good for giving the detachment bonus to the Genestealer Cult. They don't need to shoot the thing that is the target of their daring recon. At the start of the shooting phase, you nominate a target within 18 inches, that is the enemy unit that your Brood Brothers will be rerolling hit rolls of 1 against. And then, with your las cannon, probably las cannon, you can shoot something else. And then the Genestealer Cult get +1 to hit against that unit. Now the Guard and the Genestealer Cult can be boosted against 2 different targets from 1 model. And the Scout Sentinel can scout onto objectives. A wonderful unit for completing secondary missions. Last in the A tier are the Rough Riders. They have lasguns to shoot and very easily convey the detachment rule, but we're mainly taking them for the Strength 9 with Lance, Melter Lancers, hitting on a 3+. That is very good for damaging tanks. And they're versatile as they also have a Frag Lance. Whatever enemy you're facing, you have the tools on a big spike to deal with it. Sadly, there's no combat support for them like fixed bayonets as an order. At the time of recording, they are cheaper than the Death Riders of Krieg, even though I think their points should be the other way around. Now we move to what I consider the B tier units. They are still good choices, but if you have the points, I would choose more A tier units. Armored Sentinels are tougher than people expect with their 2+ save. You can give them a las cannon to hunt vehicles and monsters, and they get to reroll all wound rolls against those vehicles and monsters. If you're going to fire more mining lasers at the enemy, they're a good unit to shoot first and spot for the Genestealer Cult units. But they're not as valuable as the Scout Sentinels. The Basilisk makes the earth go boom boom boom. Their special ability is slowing down the enemy movement in a game based on movement, so that's really valuable. Indirect fire doesn't work with the detachment rule, so you can't give the integrated tactics bonus when firing indirectly. And the Basilisk can't have orders in this detachment to boost them up. They also lost the heavy keyword on their big gun with the Codex, so they're going to hit on a 5+ when firing indirectly. Scout Sentinels can help with reroll hit rolls of 1, but the daring recon of the Scout Sentinels no longer removes the penalty to hit when firing indirectly. If you are having problems with lots of Space Marines, as bigger blocks of intercessors has become a bit more popular recently, Basilisks have a good number of shots and damage too to kill those Space Marines. The Bane Sword's a big tank with lots of shots at high strength. That can tackle heavy infantry and vehicles of all sizes. But the deadly demise of those vehicles is more likely to go off. I have only ever had that work against me. It is 40 points more expensive than the very similar Shadow Sword. That should do the same job without it blowing up in your face. And the Bane Hammer is another good super heavy for taking on anything. Enough shots for Horde infantry, high damage for elite infantry. It may be my preference, but if I have a super heavy, I want a dedicated tank slayer for the big problem vehicles, and we can leave killing infantry to the rest of the army. The Bane Hammer also has a transport capacity. Even if you're not moving forward, you could get a guard unit inside the back and then disembark out the front, so that is a big movement jump of the length of the vehicle. The best and biggest tank is next. The Cyclops Demolition Vehicle. Oh, it's so cute. It's so thematic. We love it. It's cheap as well. And while it can't perform actions with Objective Control 0, it can complete secondary missions like being in table quarters and behind enemy lines from Battle Round 3 if it comes on from strategic reserves. Having remote little bomb tanks go around is so Genestealer Cult that we have to include one somewhere. So weigh up the Cyclops Demolition Vehicle and Martial Espionage. Same points. Which one is going to help your army list the most? The Eradicator Lehman Russ Urban Warfare tank is the toughest Lehman Russ tank. It had a change to its unit rule, as it used to be like the Demolisher Lehman Russ, where it could still use its big gun when firing at enemies in engagement range. Now it is truly for urban warfare, and all enemy ranged attacks are -1 damage if the tank is in cover. If you are familiar with 10th edition, you are in cover basically all of the time. If you somehow found yourself without the benefit of cover, you can use the smokescreen stratagem, and then you explicitly have the benefit of cover. And now you're -1 to be hit because of stealth, -1 to the enemy's armor penetration, and -1 to their damage. It is my favourite looking of the Leman Russ tanks. It has a fun gun for smashing orc hordes with blast and ignore cover, but without orders, we need to instead take the regular Leman Russ tank, which gets to reroll hit rolls. When the points first came out in 10th edition, there were 40 points between the Eradicator and the Demolisher, but with only 5 points difference between the Eradicator and the Battle Tank, take the Battle Tank with the Battle Cannon. The Executioner Leman Russ tank gets +1 to hit if the enemy is below half strength, but only with its main gun. That is okay at taking out heavy infantry with damage 3, or trying to finish damaged enemy tanks. The Leman Russ Battle Cannon rerolls all hit rolls, and is always damage 3 without hazardous. The Executioner is a good tank, a B tier tank, but I think the Leman Russ battle tank with the battle cannon is going to be better in this detachment. The Leman Russ Exterminator, now that is a great tank in the Imperial Guard Codex. When it shoots at an enemy with Withering Hail, it increases the armor penetration for all of the Imperial Guard units firing at the same target. That is great if your army is entirely Imperial Guard. It's good support, but we can only support a small part of our army. That is less than half of your army, because it's 50%, excluding the points for the Exterminator. That's all it will benefit. There are no bonuses to hit or rerolls coming from the datasheet. It can hurt heavy infantry because of damage 3, but remember that all of the Leman Russes can have sponsons for free. That's where you can have multi-melters that are damage D6 plus melter 2, so you're always going to do at least 3 damage if you're in half range. The Krieg Artillery Team is a new gun. At least if you haven't used Legends before, then there was a Krieg Mortar and a Quad Launcher. The Siege Gun is new, but you have to compare it to the Field Artillery. The Krieg Artillery Team has toughness and wounds and a good save that means you can have them out in the open, and it will take dedicated anti-tank to bring them down. Being in the open lets you provide the detachment bonus, and the weapon you have doesn't have the penalty for indirect fire. But it can if you want to shoot at something out of line of sight. The Siege Cannon option is going to be best for damaging enemy monsters or vehicles or heavy infantry. Those are the things that we struggle with as Genestealer Cult players. The Field Battery, which looks a bit Morcadian but isn't necessarily, you could have 2 big las cannons or 2 indirect fire bombast field guns. Indirect fire and damage 2 is good for taking out infantry like orcs and heavier infantry like Space Marines from safety. The Field Battery is very squishy. For the cost of the las cannons, which need to be in line of sight and pointing at a tank, you should be picking a big tank for your own list if you have the points to spare. 2 Scout Sentinels with las cannons are closer in points and harder to take down. And the Field Battery won't be getting any orders from sustained hits from their unit rule. We have no orders to issue. We don't have voice of command. The Taurox is a great speedy transport for keeping your Kazakin safe and then dropping them off as a rapid response vehicle. There's a problem on an objective. Send in the Taurox. Because it's a dedicated transport, the Kazakin or Krieg engineers can scout at the start of the game with that vehicle. Alternatively, there is the Chimera. That is a little tougher than the Taurox with an extra wound and an extra point of toughness, and a slight increase in firepower. Same points at time of recording. When given the choice, and depending on your collection, choose the cheapest. We can't use the Chimera special rule, so that is redundancy we are paying for, whereas the Taurox can advance and you can still disembark the unit inside. That's why it's a great rapid response vehicle. Moving out of the C tier, we're getting into some more niche cases where this is good, but it needs to be a Wednesday. The cheapest Leman Russ is the Vanquisher. Big cannon with one shot. A mini shadow sword if you like. It's scary for the potential it might hit. No one is going to set their tank in front of it just in case it does hit. Otherwise, you can think of this Leman Russ as the cheapest plasma cannon and las cannon carrier. It can have 3 heavy flamers to kill the enemy who are probably in cover, and we have a decent overwatch because you might roll a 6 for the Vanquisher cannon, but the heavy flamers will be useful. However, remember what I said about the points limit. You can't really get another backup Leman Russ if the Vanquisher fails to perform. You can't order it to shoot better, so I recommend spending a few extra points to get a Leman Russ battle tank. It's the same kind of gun, just a little bit shorter. The Rogaldorn Tank Commander I am putting in C, because for 25 points more to get the Commander compared to the Rogaldorn, well, we can't use the orders, so I don't think it's worth it. You lose the once per game reduced damage to 0 and instead can reroll 1 hit, 1 wound and 1 damage roll. That is pretty good, but would you choose that over a Cyclops demolition vehicle? They also cost 25 points. I would rather have the regular Rogaldorn and the Cyclops demolition vehicle. We are not Imperial Guard, so we can't use orders, and that is a big thing as to why people will take the Rogaldorn Tank Commander over the regular Rogaldorn. The Baneblade feels like a more expensive Rogaldorn. We get very little from its special rule to provide cover. Even if your board was sparse in terrain, only Astra Militarum models can benefit. The other super heavies are better. I feel the same about the Storm Sword. I like the Siege Cannon, but prefer the reliable damage of the Shadow Sword's damage 12. Even though the Shadow Sword has fewer shots, you are paying 55 points more to get the Storm Sword. You could have a Scout Sentinel and a Shadow Sword for that cost. The Concussive Wave special rule has too many requirements to be effective, and it can hurt allied units. The Primaris Psyker is a useful... these are not Space Marine Primaris Psykers. It's an Imperial Guard Primaris Psyker. They can pop a 4+ invulnerable save when needed against enemy shooting. It is what the Genestealer Cult Magus should be, so that is an easy proxy. Or it is what the Benefactus special ability should be, because the Benefactus can have a 4+ invulnerable save for just itself, just once. That doesn't seem correct, but that's what the rules are, and we've gone past several balance patches since then. The Primaris Psyker is a good one to keep the Krieg blobs alive, as regardless of armor penetration, a 4+ invulnerable save against shooting is going to be better than the 5+ armor save that the Death Corps of Krieg already has. But what about the regular infantry squad? The Imperial Guard Infantry Squad, the most recognizable unit aside from the Lehman Russ and maybe the Chimera. When you think of Imperial Guard holding the line, you think of the Infantry Squad. This is a squad that can have a las cannon and a plasma gun. As long as they're on an objective, even in the open, they have the benefit of cover. So they're a good objective holder if you want neophytes as your damage dealer or neophytes to sticky it and then move on. Oh, what's that? Games Workshop did update the Legends document. And Games Workshop didn't add the infantry squad to it. Wow! Well, have some of this! Oh, that's right, Games Workshop can't see this because I don't have finger tracking on. I'm gonna pretend I didn't see this. But we can move on from it. There are rules for the unit in 10th edition 40k. We're over halfway into 10th edition 40k. They have been allowed in 10th edition 40k so far, so I don't see why they wouldn't be okay from now on. The unit is 60 points for 10, and its unit card is the same as the index. That's fixed. It did have points values at the start of February 2025, showing 60 points for one squad or 120 points for a double-sized squad. You should still be able to take the infantry squad. 40k is your game to play, not Games Workshop. They set guidelines. We have fun. And the D tier choices are getting a bit more silly fun. But if I just left everything else here, you wouldn't know why these are silly choices. The Krieg Command Squad is D tier. You have a Lord Commissar, a Genestealer Cult Lord Commissar. It's a Commissar but doesn't have the Commissar keyword, so we can take it. There's a good reason not to, as with all the officers. You mainly take them for the orders, and secondary is their unit abilities and war gear like the medic and the banner. We can't use the orders, so for their points, you are better getting another squad of infantry like the infantry squad, more Death Corps of Krieg, or more neophytes. A Catachan command squad can only join Catachans. Their medic brings back D3 models. For the same price, you can always have more neophytes whose cult icon regenerates even more models. The same principles apply to the Cadian command squad. You could have 20 Cadians with a command squad, stay on an objective, and then you get D3 models back per your command phase. The banner means they're objective control 3. Because they're on an objective, they get the benefit of cover, but that combination is less effective than 20 neophytes getting back more models with an icon ward who gives them a 5+ feel no pain, and we have the option to go to ground to get the benefit of cover if we wanted. The neophytes have more weapons, the neophytes can hit better with integrated tactics, The Cadians can't get any bonuses because of the orders, so don't bother with the Cadian command squad. The Cadian Castellan as an officer is a bit better, as they can give the Kazakin sustained hit 1 and fall back and shoot, but we don't get the orders, which is the main reason to take them, and their points cost is halfway towards another squad of 10 Kazakin. Orders are a big reason not to take these units. The Leman Russ Tank Commander is far more expensive than a Leman Russ Demolisher. They can't give orders in the Brood Brothers Auxilia, and tank commanders don't get the special rule of their tank gun of choice. So if you picked an Exterminator autocannon, you don't get the Withering Hail bonus rule. If you pick the battle cannon, you don't get to reroll hit rolls. The only benefit is death befitting an officer. That's fun to die for the Patriarch and fire one last time, but if you die while in engagement range, you can't fire. Big guns never tire can't be used in situations where it is like your shooting phase. Out of phase rule says you can't use it. So you may never die in a manner befitting an Imperial officer. And if you are in the open and get shot, you're gonna roll a 1. You know it. With the Hellhammer we have some more awkwardness with the big guns never tire rule. Its special rule means that when you're using big guns never tire, you don't suffer the hit penalty. But its best weapons have blast, so it can't fire that at point blank at the enemy in engagement range as per the blast rule. So it would have to shoot them elsewhere, and they would still be at -1 to hit. It's a low damage 2 main gun. If you're taking a super heavy, take any of the other super heavies, but maybe not the Stormlord. This is a big tank with a mega bolter from a Titan strapped to the front. While it is fun to roll that many dice, we want big guns on big tanks to get rid of enemy big tanks. The special rule to have a Brood Brothers unit get inside at the end of the enemy turn is cute, and that transport capacity is enough to carry the other 500 points of Brood Brothers inside of it in a 2000 point game, but we don't need transport capacity. Transport capacity is a nice addition on the Banehammer, but that's a bonus on top of the big gun. We aren't seeking out transport capacity of that size. Choose a Taurox or a Chimera if you want transports. The Cadians are similar points to the Neophytes, and the Neophytes have pistols, have more special weapons, can use Cult Ambush without spending command points on regimental reinforcements, and have the same ability of sticky objectives. Choose the Neophytes, don't bother with the Cadians. If you have the Brood Brothers kill team which is built out of the Cadian squad, I recommend using them as Kazakin or as Death Korps of Krieg instead. Catachans are the third unit. No, the fourth unit, because we keep the infantry squad. The Catachans are cheap scouts, but Catachan heavy weapon teams are cheaper. They can still scout. Catachans are objective control too, but are the same cost as Neophytes with fewer weapon options. The Cadian weapon team is basically a worse version of the Catachan weapon team. Same points on Codex launch. After the FAQ, ignore any of the points that are written in the Codex, they are outdated before the book came out. The Cadian heavy weapon team special ability is to have better overwatch, but there's not a lot of shots to benefit. The unit with Firepoint Commander wants to use the overwatch that phase. A team with mortars can sit on the home objective, but so could Catachan weapon teams with mortars, and they get to reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 against vehicles. That can include light vehicles like the Toughness 5 Tau battlesuits that will not like being hit by mortars. The Wyvern is an okay alternative to mortar weapon teams. It doesn't have heavy, so it's going to hit on a 5+ if firing indirectly. It's only good against enemy infantry, and you know what else is good at killing enemy light infantry? I'm gesturing to the Genestealer Cult Codex generally. Between the hand flamers, the autoguns, claws of all shapes and sizes, we can handle light infantry. We don't need support from elsewhere. The Death Riders of Krieg are lacking the melter tip of the Rough Riders hunting lance. The Death Riders of Krieg are best at fighting enemy infantry, which the Genestealer Cult do anyway, but they are nice as a fun conversion project for them. You can't tell me that those aren't Genestealer Cult infected horses. The claws and the baldness are a big giveaway that the Inquisition has not noticed yet. If anything, I would use these models under the Attilan Rough Rider rules. Not many people know the difference between cavalry and slightly different but basically the same cavalry. I think it is generally accepted that the Punisher Leman Russ is the worst of the Leman Russ variants. It's a nice defensive profile and support guns like las cannons and multi-melters, but we get all of them on the other Leman Russ tanks. The Punisher Gatling Cannon is a gun dedicated to anti-infantry, and that's not what this army needs. The Manticore has big missiles. It doesn't shoot only 4 times per game, as was its rule in previous editions. It has an okay profile to kill enemy heavy infantry with damage 3 and anti-infantry 2+, but only d6 shots and hitting on a 5+, if firing indirectly. We don't have any orders to boost that up. The Field Ordnance Battery or the Krieg Siege Gun will be better and far cheaper. If you want a bigger missile, the Death Strike missile. That's fun. That is like, oh yeah, the Genestealer Cult have taken the nuclear weapons. You point it at a place, and then the turn later you can either move the place it's pointing at, or you can set off the missile and shoot it. That can clear out enemies stacked up in one place and send them scattering, but if aimed at an objective, your units that go and take it will get blown up if you fire the Death Strike. Friendly fire is on. The Hydra is okay against flying units, you reroll hit rolls, it's twin linked so you reroll wound rolls, and anti-fly 2+, you wound on a 2+. Lots of enemy units fly. Many transports in the Eldar and the Tau battlesuits, any unit with jump packs, all of them have fly. But the Hydra is not great generally. If we could boost its armor penetration, then it would be more valuable. Lehman Russ tanks operate better, and we have to be careful what we spend points on when we can't spend our points freely and are limited to half our points on Brood Brothers allies. So the Aegis defense line, you don't pay 145 points for a line of barricades that doesn't do much. Better to have 20 neophytes. And then the weird one, the Taurox Prime. Technically, we can take it, but the Taurox Prime can only carry Tempestus Scions or characters. As a dedicated transport, it will explode at deployment if there is no unit starting within it, so you can add a Primaris Psyker, put the Psyker inside it by themselves to stop that. But wasn't that quite a waste of points compared to a regular Taurox or anything else? But technically it's an option, so I have to mention it. Well, that was a lot of units, about 2 codexes worth of options, all of which can be used to some effect in this detachment. So would you be interested in buying some of these models? You've come this far, so I guess you are at least that interested. Most people who play this game have the models for it. You can buy the Imperial Guard Codex if you wished, and all of these are cheaper through my affiliates linked in the description. Using these links helps me to keep doing these videos, especially the really long ones with incredibly detailed tactics on detachments that very few people consider. In an army that not many people consider. Your money is appreciated, and you get models by doing it this way. Or there's Ko-fi, which is just money to me. Both is an option, like Brood Brothers and the Genestealer Cult. The best way to understand what they can do and what a successful army list looks like is to show off some army lists. Army lists that I have used. The best way to know how to play this detachment is to play the detachment. There are different tactics in effect in each list, and unless one screams that it is your style of play, you will probably want to modify the list to better suit your gameplay and your collection. We start with 1,000 points. This can be an army in itself. 1,000 points is fun, and I recommend more people play this size of game. Or you can use it as a base to build to a bigger points value. There are 2 1,000 point lists. The first one is called Combined Fire. The second one doesn't have a name. The first one has a name because it's fun. The first list has a Reductus Saboteur with martial espionage, 10 Metamorphs, a Goliath truck, 10 Kazakin, a Taurox, a Krieg heavy weapon squad, 5 Acolytes with hand flamers, 5 Rough Riders, 5 Atalan Jackals, an Achilles Ridge Runner, a Scout Sentinel, and 10 Neophytes. This comes to 635 points for the Genestealer Cult side, 365 points for the Imperial Guard side, and totaling 1,000 points. The idea of this list is it works in pairs and has a lot of flamer weapons. The 5 deep striking hand flamer acolytes could arrive near to the outflanking Krieg flamer teams, that is all of the fire. You could use symbiotic destruction to have the Krieg heavy flamer teams reroll wound rolls of 1, but the acolytes already have reroll wound rolls of 1 and rerolling all wounds against enemies on objectives. They just want to use fire. They can complete missions, they can flame things. The Kazakin are in a Taurox and the Metamorphs are in a truck. This is an armoured strike with support. The 10 Metamorphs have hand flamers, so we don't need the +1 to hit from integrated tactics, but will like the reroll wound rolls of 1 from symbiotic destruction. The 2 vehicles are scouting. Because the Metamorphs have scout, The Kazakin have Scout, and the transports they are in are both dedicated transports. We could have Krieg combat engineers instead of the Kazakin, but the Kazakin can order themselves to hit on a 2+. They are our only source of orders. The Reductus Saboteur can hop into the truck after the Scout move on turn 1 from her advanced infiltrating position, and then a turn later, when the units get out and shoot, she can also have full reroll to wound because of the Goliath truck special ability. And the Reductus can get out to be closer to the Kazakin to make their shots better with martial espionage. The Taurox helps the Goliath truck with integrated tactics, the truck helps the unit disembarking from it to reroll all wound rolls this phase. That includes the Reductus Saboteur, who helps the Kazakin with martial espionage, and the Kazakin help the Reductus by firing before her and giving her assortment of bombs +1 to hit. Nice for turn 2, and in the enemy turn, we have a very good overwatch from the Metamorphs, a surge move to get in front of the Kazakin and protect them, and in future turns, if there are more enemies to kill, symbiotic destruction between any 2 of those units, but that wants to almost certainly include the Hand Flamer Metamorphs. This is the true power of friendship. And flamer weapons. These 2 transports go for the most dangerous enemy that they can kill, and they get back into the transports when they want to drive away and they're done. The Taurox is usually a one-way trip. But while the infantry units are fighting, the transports, especially the Taurox, can complete secondary missions. It often dies quickly and easily, so the Goliath truck on the same objective is a good idea. We know that the Krieg weapon squad is going to have the flamers, and they are outflanking. The 5 acolytes with hand flamers will be deep striking. They will have 4 hand flamers and a cult icon, because then you can regenerate some models. Not everything in 1000 points can wipe out 5 acolytes. But if you did get wiped out, the 5 acolytes are a good choice for cult ambush resurgence points. You can keep coming back with this same unit and annoying the enemy, and then you can spend your 4 other points on the Metamorphs. The Rough Riders pair with the Atlan Jackals and they support one another. The Rough Riders can make the Atlan Jackals shoot better with the integrated tactics. They provide fast support for the 2 transports, or they go on the other flank, and that helps the Rough Riders who are charging against enemy vehicles over there. You shouldn't need to help your 2 transports, as the Metamorphs have good combat ability after good shooting, and the Kazakin have good shooting. The Jackals can get to an objective, but if they needed to, they have the speed to zoom and assist elsewhere. The Rough Riders can get stuck in, and remember that they can fall back and shoot and charge. Make sure you do that, not just for the fight first, but so your Lance ability, which is +1 to wound when you charge, can trigger again and again. This Achilles Ridge Runner has a mortar and a spotter. They can provide the crossfire rule as support on whichever flank is needed. I would have had the Survey Auger, but with so many of our weapons being flamers, they already ignore cover. This is why we don't need a Hellhound in this army list. The Scout Sentinel has a las cannon. Wherever you can, have high strength weapons to fight enemy tanks and vehicles. And we know the Scout Sentinel is good at supporting the Imperial Guard or the Genestealer Cult. There are a lot of supporting elements available to you, use as many as are applicable at the time. The 10 Neophytes are just there for home defense. They're not doing the fighting in this army list. They can stay on the home objective. Once the enemy reserves are committed, they can run up to the next objective, and the home objective will remain yours because of sticky objectives from a planned generations in the making. The units are paired up. That may not be the most optimal way to run this detachment, but it makes shooting better for Genestealer Cult units, and there are plenty of dials we can turn to improve our shooting when we need to. The next army list is about big guns, 1000 points again, but we're taking the best units to win with the power of the datasheets. There is a Primus with Firepoint Commander, 20 Neophytes, 5 Acolytes with Auto Pistols, 10 Neophytes, a Ridge Runner, a Sanctus with Martial Espionage, 10 Kazakin, a Field Ordnance Battery, a Katachan Heavy Weapons Team, a Lehman Russ Battle Tank with Battle Cannon, and a Scout Sentinel. This is 1000 points with 510 points from the Genestealer Cult side, 490 points from the Imperial Guard side. The Primus goes with the 20 Neophytes, and they are moved into reserve after deployment. It's useful to deploy this unit first, because then the enemy is committing some unit somewhere, and we are going to remove this unit from the board and put it in reserve, so just stick it in a corner for now. Then it will deep strike where we need to do the most damage at the best time. Probably turn 2. Rapid ingress is an option, but when we're shooting, we usually just need to deploy somewhere 9 inches away and fire with everything, which we can do a second time per battle round with Overwatch, hitting on a 5+. The 5 acolytes with auto pistols hold the home objective, and they can mine for command points. Even though we don't have great stratagems in this detachment, every command point is a potential extra grenade, or Overwatch, or tank shock. The Ridge Runner has a mining laser and a spotter, so it can hit on a 3+ normally, or we can make it hit on a 2+. This Ridge Runner could also be in reserves at the start of the game, or moved off the board into reserves by the Primus. It depends how much terrain is around, it depends how many screens there are between you and the enemy tank you want to shoot, or heavy infantry. The heavy mining laser is pretty good at killing enemy heavy infantry. The Sanctus has a sniper, this is a shooting detachment so I want the gun, and it has martial espionage. The Kazakin are a unit that start the game in outflank, in strategic reserves. Like the neophytes, they will pop up where you need to fire their guns. The Sanctus sniper can deep strike near to them when they arrive, and use martial espionage to improve the AP of their weapons. If you were facing an enemy that was all light infantry, you could instead have the Sanctus sniper deploy near the field ordnance battery. This is 2 bombast field guns. I don't want these out in the open, I want to be firing indirectly. Their shots could be enhanced by the enhancement. We are not looking for the detachment bonus from the field ordnance battery, so we don't need line of sight. We are doing indirect damage to the enemy. The Katachan heavy weapon teams could scout towards an objective. When you do your scout moves, you know whether you're going first or second. This means you can put them out in the open to shoot something of the enemy, or you could put them into safety if you're going second. They are armed with las cannons, and they will directly fire at enemy tanks or heavy infantry, probably the one that the Ridge Runner will attack, because we have 2 units, both with the same targets. The Scout Sentinel could go for the same tank. With its las cannon, hopefully it hits to do some damage, and then the detachment rule will trigger for the Genestealer Cult. It could spot a different unit, so that the Imperial Guard reroll hit rolls of 1, which the Katachan heavy weapon teams already do against vehicles and monsters, so the las cannons could all be firing at one target, and another target that the Scout Sentinel can see can be shot at by the field ordnance batteries, who don't need to see it. They would like to reroll hit rolls of 1. And finally we have the Leman Russ Battle Tank. They are great at 1000 points. Not a lot can easily take them down at that size of game. They're a big presence in a 1000 point game, while at 2000 points they get ratioed and are not as big. Being able to reroll all hit rolls means that they can clear objectives. Having a big body means you can sit on objectives and the enemy won't be able to get close to you. They are also a good option for Overwatch if the enemy moves onto an objective near to you, because you have a lot of shots and you're re-rolling all of those shots. When I played it, I found that the Leman Russ Battle Tank performed better at Overwatch than the Primus with Firepoint Commander and 20 Neophytes. This is a list that focuses more on killing the enemy rather than completing secondary missions, but they can still be completed by the Sanctus and the Scout Sentinel. Abilities don't stop working if you're completing a secondary mission. Both of these 1000 point lists were fun to play. Just adding the Imperial Guard element can really spice up the games. It may not be the strongest detachment, but there's no denying it lets you play the army very differently. And I know that people want a 2000 point list, so let's get really big with the tanks. The 2000 point list does things almost the complete opposite of what the detachment rule wants you to do. The Genestealer Cult will be completing primary and secondary missions. The Astra Militarum will be doing the fighting. We're not bothered about boosting the Genestealer Cult shooting. This list has an Icon Ward with the hero returned, 20 Neophytes, a Primus with Firepoint Commander and another 20 Neophytes, a Ridge Runner with Mortar and Auger, another Ridge Runner in a separate unit with the Mining Laser and a Spotter, a Locust with Adaptive Reprisal, 10 Metamorphs, 5 Pure Strains, 5 Acolytes with Auto Pistols, 10 Neophytes, 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, another 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, 10 Kazakin, a Scout Sentinel, a Rogel Dawn, and a Shadow Sword. The Icon Ward and Hero Returned and the Neophytes could be spread over 2 objectives, maybe, if there's enough space, and they will be a pain to shift with their high objective control, 5+ Feel No Pain, and the way the Cult Icon brings back models. The Primus and 20 Neophytes will possibly want some help from the Scout Sentinel, so that we have at least one unit with integrated tactics and we're hitting on a 3+, More importantly, we want Ridge Runner support so that we have an extra armor penetration and can do some damage. The Ridge Runner, the Mortar, and the Survey Augur provides that. They want to stay at the back in safety. We have the Augur because we are not the host of Ascension, so we don't get the free ignore cover. The other Ridge Runner, with the laser and the spotter, finishes enemies hit by the Imperial Guard units. There's nothing to stop the twin heavy stubbers from shooting something else and supporting a Genestealer Cult unit with crossfire to have an extra point of armor penetration. That only works on Genestealer Cult units. But see how the detachment rule could have been done. Pick an enemy unit you hit. Then the Genestealer Cult units get +1 for the rest of the turn. That would have been easier. Please, Games Workshop. I think one dude firing a las pistol should let Acolyte hybrids hit on 2+ in combat. Yeah, no problem with that. The Locust has Adaptive Reprisal, and they join 10 Metamorphs so that we can heroically intervene for free, and we fight first. The Metamorphs could have either kind of pistol, your preference. Auto pistols for that guaranteed 6-inch surge, or hand flamers for the hand flamers. I would still make sure to have a cult icon. Then there are 5 small Genestealer Cult units to score victory points. The 5 Pure Strains infiltrate to stop enemy infiltrators. They can complete secondary missions on turn 1. 5 Acolytes with auto pistols stay on the home objective, try and generate command points. If the enemy deep strikes nearby to attack our home objective, you can use a dark network to move away from the enemy. Ideally out of line of sight, but still on the objective. Depending on the map, that may be possible. Even if you have to move off the home objective, that is okay because the 10 neophytes are going to start on that home objective as well. They sticky it in your first command phase, and then they run to the next objective. The 2 lots of 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers have 2 jobs: complete secondary missions, and use Symbiotic Destruction. It doesn't matter if they get no benefit from it, the Imperial Guard tanks will. The 10 Kazakin can outflank, or they could hide behind the Shadow Sword. I prefer Strategic Reserves and then attack something you want dead. Don't worry about bonuses and stratagems, we're just shooting the Melter Guns and ordering ourselves to be +1 to hit. The Scout Sentinel can complete secondary missions. It fires its las cannon to help the Primus' neophytes, and it can spot for the guard tanks. So the guard tanks can be rerolling hit rolls of 1 and rerolling wound rolls of 1 with Symbiotic Destruction. The Rogel Dawn has lots of guns and really wants Symbiotic Destruction to reroll those wound rolls of 1. There's the Coaxial Autocannon, the Heavy Stubber, 2 Melter Guns, 2 Multi-Melters, an Oppressor Cannon, and a Pulverizer Cannon. Even though not all of that is great at shooting vehicles, most of that is good at shooting vehicles, so we fire all of it at the same target, which is a requirement for the Symbiotic Destruction stratagem. The Shadow Sword is much easier. You point it at the biggest enemy tank. If the Shadow Sword remains stationary, it hits on a 3+ because of heavy, and the Scout Sentinel support is valuable to not mess up with the Super Sayonara shot. I like adding the Shadow Sword as it's a big tank, which is easy for transporting your army to events and one-off games. If you didn't like the Super Heavy, you can have another Rogel Dawn and a Lehman Russ tank if you prefer. With both a Rogel Dawn and a Shadow Sword, you can appreciate both sides of the guard experience. Rolling lots of dice, or rolling a few dice that scare the enemy and make big booms happen. This army list should cause damage to the enemy as soon as you can, and try to stay alive with the damage dealers. The Acolytes with Hand Flamers can be brought back again and again if they keep being killed. Having a big tank on each flank gives you a surprising amount of control as enemies do not want to put their units in front of the Shadow Sword. I can't imagine why. And the Neophyte Hordes control the objectives, while the Acolytes and even the Kazakin can move around the enemy rear and cause problems. Now my honest opinion of this detachment as a whole. It has really bad stratagems. It is Genestealer Cult on hard mode. Playing with Astra Militarum units is great fun, in addition to the Genestealer Cult, but it's not as fun as the Index with 25% integrated Brood Brothers all of the time. The only place we can have those Brood Brother models you painted up, unless you nicely ask your opponent to let you include them in any other detachment, up to 25% to match the Index rules. If you want to take this ally concept even further, infiltrate the Admech as the Bladed Cog. Use the Brood Brothers Auxilia rules, but change the guard for Admech units. If you want the Genestealer Cult and the Tyranids together, we have another detachment with cool rules to try out, all explained in this video. My darlings and viewers, whichever side of the codex you're on, have a great day of 40k.